It was a bright, cheerful morning in Ezenwa village. Everyone was talking about one thing: Mama Nozi's 60th birthday celebration. The compound was alive with colours, laughter, and the sweet smell of jollof rice and fried plantain. Family members had been planning this day for weeks, wanting to honour the matriarch of the household in a big way. People travelled from nearby villages just to be part of the occasion. Chairs were set, music filled the air, and the sun smiled down on the happy crowd. At the centre of the preparations was Nkem, Mama Ngozi's daughter-in-law. She had been up since dawn, moving from the kitchen to the compound, making sure everything was perfect. She helped the caterers, organised the decorations, directed the servers, even made sure Mama Ngozi's favourite dish was just right. She didn't complain once, even when her feet ached, or when she skipped breakfast, to keep things running smoothly. This wasn't just a birthday, it was a moment of pride for the family. Nkem wanted everything to go well, not just for Mama Ngozi, but for her husband and the family name. As the guests arrived in their finest clothes, the atmosphere felt magical. Smiles, hugs, and cheerful greetings filled the air. Children played, elders chatted, and music played softly in the background. Everyone praised how beautiful the compound looked, how delicious the food smelled. Nkem stood in the corner, tired but quietly proud, watching everything she worked for come to life. She thought, maybe today, Mama Ngozi will finally see how much I care. Little did she know what was coming. In front of more than 100 guests, something unforgettable happened. The air was filled with music, laughter, and the warm smell of jollof rice and fried meat. It was Mama Ngozi's 60th birthday party, a big celebration with family, friends, and neighbours all gathered in their best clothes. Nkem, her niece, was helping with the food, running around to serve everyone. She had been on her feet for hours, carrying trays, smiling through the sweat and tiredness. But somehow, something went wrong. Mama Ngozi had been waiting to be served, and by the time Nkem got to her table, she was already upset. Her face was tight with anger. Nkem smiled nervously and placed the plate in front of her. Without a word, without a warning, Mama Ngozi stood up and slapped Nkem hard across the face. The loud sound echoed through the hall. Conversations stopped. The music seemed to pause. Every eye turned toward them. People gasped. A child dropped her spoon. Someone whispered, "What just happened?" "She's disrespectful," Mama Ngozi said loudly, shaking with anger. "She served me last. Me. In my own party." Nkem stood there frozen, her cheek burning, eyes wide in shock. She didn't say a word. Her hands trembled, still holding the serving tray. Tears welled up, but she held them back. She looked around. No one said anything. No one stood up for her. Some guests looked away, pretending to be busy with their phones or food. Others just stared, mouths slightly open. She felt small, ashamed, embarrassed. But most of all, she felt hurt. Not just because of the slap, but because of the silence. Because no one defended her, not even her own mother, who stood across the room with her arms crossed, saying nothing. Later in the kitchen, Nkem cried quietly behind the door. She wiped her tears fast, trying not to let them fall into the food. She didn't want anyone to see her broken like that. A cousin came in and whispered, "Sorry, you know how Mama Ngozi." Nkem nodded, but inside, she screamed. Why did everyone keep making excuses for her? That day stayed with her, not because of the pain of the slap, but because of how easy it was for everyone to watch her be humiliated and stay silent, like her dignity didn't matter, like she was just a servant, not family. Sometimes it's not the slap that hurts them. Nkem didn't fight back. She just stood there, quiet, her eyes heavy with pain. Her heart felt like it had been ripped open, but she said nothing. That wasn't new. This wasn't the first time she had been humiliated. Her in-laws had never really accepted her. From the beginning, they looked at her like she wasn't good enough, like she didn't belong. And even though she tried, oh, how she tried, nothing she did was ever enough. She cooked, cleaned, smiled politely. She stayed up late, helping around the house. Even when she was tired from work, she said, "Yes, Ma," and "Yes, sir," with a smile. Even when their words cut deep, she bought gifts, tried to impress them, tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law. But they only saw her faults. Every small mistake became a big issue. Every little thing was twisted and used against her. And still, Nkem smiled. Not because she was happy, but because she didn't want to bring shame to her husband. She didn't want to break the home she was trying so hard to build, but today, it hurt more than usual. Maybe it was the way her mother-in-law shouted at her in front of neighbors, or how her sister-in-law rolled her eyes like Nkem was nothing. Maybe it was the way her husband stayed silent, sitting there like he couldn't hear the insults. That silence crushed her more than the words did. She wasn't asking him to fight his family, but she hoped he'd at least stand up for her, say something, anything. She felt tears burning at the back of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. She knew they'd call her dramatic, or worse, accuse her of playing the victim, so she swallowed the pain, just like she had done all these years. Her smile returned, shaky and forced, but it was there, that same smile that hid her pain, that fooled the world into thinking everything was fine. But inside, she was breaking, bit by bit, piece by piece. She missed the days when she laughed freely, when she didn't have to walk on eggshells in her own home. She missed feeling safe. She missed feeling loved. And as she stood there, surrounded by people who claimed to be her family but treated her like a stranger, she realized something. She couldn't keep pretending forever. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who suffer in silence, who smile through heartbreak, who carry the weight of peace on their shoulders so others can rest. But even the strongest hearts can only take so much. And in that moment, Nkem wasn't just quiet. She was tired. So very tired. Nkem didn't say anything. She just walked out of the event quietly, without looking back. No goodbye. No explanations. She moved like a shadow, slipping out of the room. Some people noticed. They whispered to each other. A few raised their eyebrows. Others shook their heads. Everyone had something to say. Everyone except Nkem. She heard the whispers, but she didn't stop. She kept walking, her steps calm but heavy, with everything she didn't say. She didn't owe anyone a performance. Her silence was loud enough. Inside, her heart was screaming, but on the outside she stayed still, strong, quiet. When she got home that night, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just opened her closet, took out a bag, and started packing, slowly, thoughtfully, one piece of clothing at a time. She folded everything neatly, her favorite dress, her mother's scarf, the journal where she once wrote down all her dreams. Every item told a story. Every zipper, every button felt like a goodbye. She didn't pack in a rush. There was no panic in her hands, just a deep, steady kind of tired, the kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. Nkem wasn't running away. She was choosing peace, choosing herself. Outside, the night was quiet too, like it understood. The stars didn't blink. The moon didn't ask questions. It just watched as she zipped up her bag and sat down on the edge of the bed. For a long time, she didn't move. She just sat there, holding on to the silence, letting it wrap around her like a blanket. Somewhere inside her, something had shifted. Not broken, but changed. She had spent so long trying to stay, trying to please, trying to make everything look okay on the outside. But tonight, she chose something else. She chose to leave without permission. No dramatic exit, no fight, just a quiet goodbye. People would talk. They always do. They'd wonder why she left, what happened, what went wrong. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that she finally listened to herself, to that small, quiet voice inside that said, enough. Nkem didn't know exactly where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay. And sometimes, that's the bravest kind of journey. The one that begins with a quiet exit and a packed bag in the middle of the night. Would you like a version of this with dialogue or character thoughts included? 2 days after the party, Nkem's silence was finally broken. She sat down at her desk late that night and poured out everything she had kept inside for years. The words flowed like a dam breaking open. Every hurt, every slap, every cruel word, every moment she had been made to feel less than was written down in black and white. She didn't hold back. She wrote about the humiliation, the way Mama Ngozi treated her like she wasn't family, like she wasn't worthy of basic respect, the constant criticism, the years of feeling invisible in her own home. The next morning, when she woke up, her letter was published. It was in the local women's magazine, but Nkem didn't just leave it there. She shared it online, and within hours, it was everywhere. Women from all over Mbano and beyond read it, shared it, and commented on it. The message hit home. The struggles of being a daughter-in-law, the unspoken rules that held women in the shadows, were all too familiar to so many. Nkem's words spoke for them. She had the courage to say what they couldn't. The letter wasn't just about the slap. It was about everything that led up to it. It was about the emotional wounds, the years of feeling like she didn't belong, the silent abuse that so many women endured in the name of family and tradition. She wrote about the times she had been forced to smile through the pain, to play the role of the good daughter-in-law, even when every part of her was breaking. She wrote about the pressure to always be perfect, to never speak out, to never be anything but what was expected of her. The letter spread like wildfire. It was shared in WhatsApp groups, posted on social media, and discussed in villages far and wide. Women who had experienced similar pain reached out to her, sharing their own stories of suffering in silence. The letter gave them a voice. They no longer had to stay hidden. They could speak out without fear. Nkem knew the backlash was coming. Mama Ngozi was powerful in the village, respected by many, but she didn't care anymore. The truth had been set free, and it wasn't something anyone could take back. No longer would the story be told from only one side. No longer would Nkem be the quiet, obedient wife who suffered in silence. She was done with that. The letter was her way of reclaiming her story, her dignity, and her voice. The whole town was talking about it. Some were shocked, others supported her, and some were angry. But one thing was clear. Nkem had set something in motion. The silence that had been so suffocating was broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The moment Nkem's letter was shared online, it took off like wildfire. Women from all over Mbano, and even the surrounding villages, started reposting it. They had been living with similar struggles for years, and Nkem's words gave them the courage to speak out. They'd been silent for too long, just like her, and now they saw someone who had the strength to fight back. The letter didn't just stay within the village. It spread far and wide, reaching even more people. Social workers, activists, and even influencers started talking about it. Nkem's story was everywhere, on blogs, social media, and even the news. It wasn't just the younger women who took notice. Older generations of women, who had quietly accepted their roles for so long, were now sharing the letter with a sense of urgency, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally say what they had been too afraid to admit. The letter became a symbol. It was more than just Nkem's personal experience. It was a voice for every woman who had been mistreated, belittled, or ignored. As the story spread, Mama Ngozi's name was everywhere too, but not in the way she'd ever wanted. She went from being a respected matriarch to being vilified in public. People who had once praised her for her strength and wisdom now questioned everything they had believed about her. Some even said they had always suspected something wasn't right, but had never been able to prove it. Now, the truth was out there, and there was no turning back. The reactions were divided, of course. There were those who stood by Mama Ngozi, defending her actions and accusing Nkem of being ungrateful. But they were in the minority. Most people sided with Nkem, applauding her for her bravery. The truth had come to light, and it was impossible to ignore anymore. The older generation, who had once believed that a woman's place was to endure silently, began to question their own beliefs. Young women from other villages, some who had been dealing with similar treatment in their own homes, found strength in Nkem's words. They saw her as a hero, someone who had stood up for them when they didn't have the courage to speak for themselves. The conversation didn't end with the letter. It sparked a movement, one that was long overdue. For Mama Ngozi, it was a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her pride, her reputation, everything she had built was slowly crumbling. No longer was she the strong matriarch everyone had respected. She had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with the old ways of thinking. And for Nkem, the journey had only just begun. She had set a spark that was quickly turning into a fire, and there was no telling where it would lead. After Nkem's letter went viral, something inside her clicked. She knew she couldn't just let this moment pass. There was so much pain, so much silence, and now, for the first time, women were listening. They were reaching out to her, telling their own stories of mistreatment, emotional abuse, and neglect. Nkem realized that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for all of them. That's when she decided to take action. She started a women's support group, a safe space for wives and daughters-in-law who were struggling, just like she had. It wasn't just a group to share stories. It became a place for healing. Women who had suffered in silence for years now had a voice. Nkem listened to them, comforted them, and helped them find the strength to stand up for themselves. They began to realize that they didn't have to accept the abuse. that their worth wasn't tied to the roles society had assigned them. They could fight back, just like Nkem had. The support group grew quickly. More and more women from all over Ezenwa and even neighboring towns joined. They weren't just looking for someone to talk to, they were looking for a way out, for a way to take control of their lives. Nkem gave them that. She helped them understand that they didn't have to stay silent anymore. Every meeting, every conversation became a small victory. The walls of shame and fear began to crumble. As the group grew, so did Nkem's reputation. People started calling her the voice of Ezenwa, a title she never expected, but one she carried with pride. She became a symbol of strength, not just in Ezenwa, but in villages far beyond. Her name was known across the region, and her group became a lifeline for many women. Women who once felt invisible were now standing tall, no longer afraid to speak their truth. But it wasn't easy. Nkem faced a lot of resistance, especially from people who still believed in the old ways. They called her rebellious, disrespectful, and a troublemaker. Some even said she was destroying the tradition and values of their community. But none of that mattered to Nkem anymore. She had seen the power of her words. She had felt the weight of the women's stories and understood that change was needed, no matter how hard it would be. Her group wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. It was about helping women rediscover their self-worth, teaching them to stand up for themselves, and giving them the tools to fight for a better life. Slowly but surely, Nkem was changing the narrative. She was showing women that they were strong, capable, and deserving of respect. And as more and more women stood with her, the movement grew. What started as one woman's quiet rebellion had turned into a revolution, and it was only getting started. After Nkem's letter went viral, people expected Obinna to step in, to stand by his wife and defend her. But instead, he stayed silent. His silence was deafening. It was as though he was trying to pretend nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just watched his mother humiliate his wife in front of over 100 people. He didn't call Nkem to apologize, or even acknowledge the pain she had endured. He just said nothing. At first, Nkem tried to make sense of it. Maybe he didn't know how to handle the public attention. Maybe he was afraid of what his mother might think or say. But as the days went by and nothing changed, it became clear. Obinna wasn't choosing his wife. He wasn't stepping up in the way she needed him to. He wasn't even trying to defend her, not to Mama Ngozi, not to anyone. Nkem felt a heavy weight on her chest every time she thought about it. Her husband, the man she had loved and trusted, was silent when she needed him the most. It hurt more than the slap, more than the years of mistreatment. She realized then that her battle wasn't just with her in-laws, it was with him too. Obinna's silence spoke louder than any words he could have said. By choosing not to speak up, he was letting his mother's actions go unchecked. He was allowing the abuse to continue, and he was choosing to stand by the woman who had hurt her, instead of standing with his wife. As Nkem's story spread, so did the news of Obinna's silence. People started whispering about him too. They began to question his loyalty, his strength, his love for his wife. If he couldn't defend her, what kind of man was he? Even Mama Ngozi's supporters started to notice. Some began to shift their opinions, not just about Nkem, but about Obinna. His lack of action only made things worse for Mama Ngozi. The more he said nothing, the more people turned on her. It was as if her power had been slowly slipping away, piece by piece, and Obinna's silence was playing a big part in it. For Nkem, it was another painful realization. She had always known that marriage was about partnership, but now it felt like she was carrying the weight of their relationship alone. She had fought for so long, for so many things, but now she realized that she couldn't do it by herself, not when her own husband refused to fight beside her. His silence was more than just not speaking out. It was his way of showing her that he wasn't willing to lose anything for her. Nkem felt betrayed, not just by her in-laws, but by the man who had promised to be her partner for life. She had fought to free herself from a lifetime of silence, but now she was forced to face the reality that her marriage too had been built on silence, on unspoken truths, ignored pain, and unmet expectations. The pressure on Mama Ngozi grew heavier with every passing day. The village, once full of respect for her, had turned its back. Everywhere she went, people whispered. The elders, who once praised her for her wisdom, now questioned her actions. Her friends avoided eye contact, and even the younger women, who had looked up to her, began to speak out, sharing stories of how she had treated them, how she had belittled them, just like she had done to Nkem. It wasn't just the people in Ezenwa who were upset. News of the public humiliations spread quickly, and soon people from surrounding towns were talking about Mama Ngozi too. Women's groups organized protests, and social media was flooded with posts condemning her behavior. For the first time in her life, Mama Ngozi was not the respected matriarch of the village. She was the villain in a story that was spreading faster than she could control. Under the weight of the backlash, Mama Ngozi had no choice but to act. She called a public meeting. She appeared in front of the village with a group of elders by her side, her face tight with regret. The once proud matriarch, known for her strength, now stood before the crowd looking smaller, humbled, even fragile. The community waited, eyes locked on her as she took a deep breath and began to speak. "I have wronged my daughter-in-law," she said, her voice steady but laced with the shame she could no longer hide. "I slapped her. I humiliated her in front of everyone, and I did not show the respect she deserves." Her words were measured, her tone serious, but the sincerity in her voice was hard to ignore. "I was wrong, and for that, I am truly sorry." But as she spoke, Nkem stood at the back of the crowd watching her. She didn't feel a sense of relief. No weight lifted from her chest. There was no forgiveness in her heart. Not yet. She had waited so long for this apology, but now it felt like too little, too late. The damage had been done. Mama Ngozi's pride, her status, her reputation, everything she had built over the years, was shattered. Nkem had seen too much, felt too much. The apology wasn't enough to erase the years of mistreatment, the cruelty that had been disguised as tradition and respect. The apology wasn't the end of Mama Ngozi's fall. It was just the beginning of her downfall. Her status as the revered elder was gone. No one would look at her the same way again. The respect she had built up over decades of being a strong, feared woman crumbled in an instant, and it was gone forever. The community had lost trust in her, and nothing could bring that back. Nkem had won, in a way, but it didn't feel like a victory. The pain that Mama Ngozi caused her, and countless others, couldn't be healed with a few words. The damage was deep, and it would take much more than an apology to restore what had been lost. For Nkem, it wasn't about winning, it was about her freedom, and that was something that no apology could ever give her back. After everything that happened, Nkem found her voice in a way she never expected. She didn't just speak out, she wrote a book. The Slap That Freed Me became her story, a raw and honest account of everything she had been through. It wasn't just about the slap that humiliated her in front of hundreds. It was about the years of silence, the emotional scars, and the strength she found when she chose to break free. The book quickly became a bestseller, and people from all over the country reached out to thank her for sharing her truth. The impact of her words spread even further. Nkem was invited to speak in churches, universities, and community groups. She became a beacon of hope for women who had been too afraid to speak out. Her story resonated with so many wives, daughters-in-law, and women everywhere who had been silenced by tradition, fear, and control. She wasn't just sharing her pain, she was showing them that it was possible to break free, to stand up for themselves and to reclaim their lives. Nkem's rise wasn't just about personal success, it was about a revolution, one that began with a slap but grew into a movement. Women everywhere began to find their voices. They reached out to Nkem, telling her how her story gave them the courage to speak up, to fight for their dignity, and to change their lives. What started as her personal battle had turned into something much bigger, something that would leave a mark on their community for years to come. Nkem had no idea when she wrote her book that it would spark such a movement. But in that one moment, everything changed. A single slap had ended her silence and started a revolution.